Hi, everyone. This is Tori Vandeland with PreventConnect. This podcast is part 3 of a 3-part series where Susan Gomberpour interviews Michael Jackson of Peace Pros LA. On parts 1 and 2, Susan and Michael discuss Peace Pros LA and how they engage community members through challenging unhealthy masculinity. This episode explores challenges and triumphs and provides key takeaways. Enjoy!
Since you mentioned data, obviously I'm a researcher, I have to pick that one up. Excuse me. So tell me a little bit about what changes you were hoping to see, especially in the beginning, and what changes you actually did see, and how did you know, right? And then bring it from the past into today, right? Like, is what you want out of Peace Pros still kind of the same, or have you changed over time? What kind of, outcomes and results that you want? And how do you know? Like, how do you figure out if it's working in the way that you think it should, or the way that you want it to?
Yeah, I think the diversity, the things we do kind of hinders that type of, as we could say, okay, this is what we set out to do, this is what we're doing, this is what we feel we've accomplished or what we haven't. And I think that's the part of, for us as we learn how we market, I don't want to say market, but how we put out there our hopes for whoever works with us, where we would like to start and where we would like to end, what type of information we would want to say was an indicator of this being something that's beyond the workshop and the survey at the end of what you liked and what you took from it. That probably goes back in the hand-to-hand of just something that if it was, as we would say, a traditional nonprofit, that would be easier to assess and also measure. But for going back to kind of the nuts and bolts of everything is the idea of really being able to see the institution take on some of these complicated issues in a way that can further, whether it's the faculty, the students, whatever, but this is their principles, right? This is things that we can help with them kind of come up with and move toward to a more inclusive and diverse world. Or community, as I would say, because then we would want to see if the cultural change happens and we can have those indicators of how things have changed for certain people, then that would be great. That would be the long-term vision when we would actually be able to, be part of that institutional structure to see how the beginning, how the journey would start and how it would end. So that's the tough part as not having we don't have the organization or the staff or things of that nature where this is something we all do full time. So I think all those are kind of like one of the things that if it was, and this is something that we all could do in a way that was okay with our individual lives, that would be part of our discussion a little bit more.
So there was since there's more stability in funding and stuff, you could redirect some of those resources to examining, impact and so on. But, I am a little curious, for example, you and I have talked about the different program goals, right? And the ultimate goal is to sort of shift these attitudes around masculinity from toxic to more healthy notions, and that ultimately the goal as well that would lead to reductions or eliminating violence, right? Because a lot of, as your group had initially done that analysis of how much of these different forms of violence, not just gender-based violence, but, gang violence, all of these different other ways that it shows up have some of their roots in these, gender norms. But one thing I'm really interested about is you all, because sometimes you're doing these trainings over a period of time and you're going in deep with people and you're working with both youth and adults, I have a sense, just as someone who does trainings myself, that you may even see something or some changes or some differences in how people think or what they say. And I'm curious, first of all, like, what you see, like what some of those changes might be that you even see or that you hear from people in their workshop, post-workshop.
Yeah, like a little caveat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like for us,
and if it differs, and if it differs between youth and adults, because sometimes I think of adults as being a little harder to change, but then again, youth can have a lot of pushback too. So I'm just curious.
Yeah. First, some of the caveats we always see is that a young man may not even know the language he used was hurtful. Mm-hmm. That is this, and you see the awakening of that, right? For adults, we've had, from even their unconscious bias, be able to kind of identify things that they should learn and do better. By the time that we're done dealing with faculty, or the ways of, there's been officers that, we worked with where the concept of de-escalation, right, also went into the idea of putting their pride aside, or putting how they feel they should be talked to. My former friend said that they call it contempt by cops sometimes. It's like, as cops are human beings too, and they have those interactions with the public, but to remember the significance they have in this interaction with this youth at this moment, at this time, and that could be very impactful on how that young person may see someone. So I've had different officers being able to say, hey, I was able to do this instead of respond this way, rely more on the communication than on the power and authority. So, those have kind of been just things that come to my head right now. Are those, I had someone tell me that, who am I supposed to be now? And then it was like, I just took everything they took of value right now. But that statement to me let me know that this he was a young adult, he was in college, that, I feel like I need to become a brand new person, or I need new ingredients into my personality. So to me, that was just like illuminating the idea that that young adults and even young kids know that there's a chance that they can look at what's healthy and what's not healthy in a very socially emotional sense.
That's interesting. Do the people in the workshops have a chance to, I don't know what role play or practice? Because that question of, who am I supposed to be now? That's so powerful. That's really moving. And I'm curious, do they get to try on some different versions of themselves in the trainings or talk about it? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we incorporate role-playing vignettes, how you have difficult conversations, everything in the practice in the form of what it would be like to have this difficult situation. And then Rob will stay after trainings and want to talk with us or email us certain questions. So for us, it's always, you know, we're on a time limit. It may be staff time, student time, faculty time, you know, all the different stuff, and being aware of, for us, our first thing was like, as a group, we were like, we can't do any training unless it's a whole day. That's where we're starting. We're not going in. Then it was like, okay, that is not the real world. They're going to let us in for an hour or two. Maybe we can, you know. So for us, it's been, as a group, I think you kind of put, I don't know if you had asked before already, but it's like there's things that we want to do, and then there's things that are doable. So for us having that humbling experience, because we're like, there's no way to do this journey in 2.5 hours, or, you know, and then we're looking at, even on our website, we're looking at, okay, here goes our services, but we haven't even figured all that out, because there's a variance of the things that we do, in the sense that, how do we stick to the understanding this cultural change? This isn't just a one-day workshop, but the power of having one of those illuminating workshops is powerful too. So trying to negotiate all that in the area of staff time, training time, or even in the idea, I mean, we did stuff, community workshop, and we're just like, here it is, let's bring some snacks, and then, you know, maybe 5 people show up, and then you're like, and it's at the right time. So you're always, I mean, this is something that, you know, it's not sexy. Like, you know, it's not like, this ain't no Tony Robbins workshop or something. I don't say, but it's one of those things where we're ready to hit and miss, but more importantly that, you know, which Peace Pros is we're still here, and we're still, trying to be, impactful, no matter small or large or whatever, so.
Well, I'm curious, just with everything that's been happening with Me Too and all the other sort of affiliated hashtags around that, have you seen more requests about this? Because I have noticed that, you know, even in my own, you know, circle or communities that I'm part of, men that I would never expect to say the words toxic masculinity comes out of their mouth, right? Like this is a concept that more people have heard about, and people sometimes they'll have negative reactions to it, like, what do you mean that men are toxic? And you have to kind of talk them off that ledge, like, that's not what that means. But I am curious whether you've seen more interest or how that's been going.
Well, I can say that the language that we've been using is, from before all of this, is kind of becoming a little, more mainstream, I guess. And we're even looking at ways to say toxic masculinity different, you know, in a way that, I mean, there's all these, you don't want people shutting their ears off before you even start, you know. But then you also want to have truth and relevance to what is really going on. So, I mean, there's always, we're always trying to package the language different in a way that before we even get there, people ain't shut off. But at the same time, be honest about what our approach is, and more importantly, our hope of changing these masculinity notions. As we say on a thing, it's like rethinking masculinity, you know. So there's, you know, we have the buzzwords, but then also what we care about is the work. So the work, the process of moving some of these ideas on to the healthier side of rethinking masculinity. So, but we haven't, and this is the other thing, we haven't. It's about the same. I mean, even with these new things coming up, but I mean, that's a process of us just being a small group of trying to figure out ways where we want to go and what we want to do, and how do we go out there and I don't want to say aggressive, but proactively go for places that we could see or be able to help create cultural change or institutional change. So, yeah.
Right. And let me I want to make sure that I understand all the sort of the key ingredients, right, that the Peace Pros has, because I think there's a lot there, right? So part of it, we talk a lot about this idea of changing social norms around masculinity, around gender roles, right? And a little bit, we talk at least about this idea of implicit bias, which is another thing that more people are becoming aware of, right? That all of us have these biases, whether we're aware of them or not, and sort of surfacing how that shows up in the brain and so on. And then I also heard you talk about, part of this idea is of people building up their own sort of leadership skills or their ability to now apply this and bring these conversations, these hard conversations, into different areas of their life, right? Which is kind of like this, I don't know if it's a leadership skill or capacity building kind of thing. So I've heard all of those elements. Are there any elements that are really key to the message you're communicating that I've missed or that is important, you think, to bring up? Oh, and I'm sorry, you mentioned intersections. You mentioned intersectionality, but we haven't really talked about it, so maybe that's the thing you might want to bring up as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think kind of going back to the previous conversation is that I feel that a lot of this work is a deep dive. It's in nature, or even when you're talking about the implicit bias, the power of the unconscious brain, and how we how information is brought. I mean, just even the brain capacity on how our brain uses shortcuts to grab information, and which may be useful or not useful, but how we interact with one another in a way, like I think I shared before, there's this my colleague, while she was doing part of workshops, she said a lot of the culture that we're in right now is a lot about calling people out. And we have from her, she gave the visual representation of that. Really this work is about calling people in. Because some of these things that we're dealing with is almost, it's hard to remove. It's inundated through culture, through television, through politics, through religion. There's a lot of things that can have some introspection and calling people in when they're dealing with that. Like if somebody has some views that you don't have, our whole thing is not to ostracize. Our whole thing is to empathize, to sit there and have those difficult conversations and be able to leave it with people feeling more accepted than pushed away. Now, that could be altruistic in nature. If somebody's whole personality is bent on white supremacy, then maybe the conversation we're having may not illuminate them in the way that we hope. But there's a lot of people that have, as myself, had male privilege, things that I didn't even know that kept me from being able to have an honest dialogue about the privilege I had. But then the moment I was able to have those conversations with people, it embittered me as a man. So I feel that in the same way, I wish the things that I've learned from myself, I want to share with the world. I want to, if I could think of violence as an option now, I'm like, how dare I? I can think, this something, that it can change. It's not a universal feeling that people can change. And they can change their point of views, and they can change the way they interact with people or what they believe about people. And so to me, that's kind of like there's all these. I think that's the fatigue part, is that there's just say our group, we believe the world could be this way, and then when we look at the world, it's everything not. You're looking for those those little places that you go, oh yeah, I'm with you over here. Let's, and you kind of want to like hold hands or something and stay up against that you don't fall down over all the pushing or the waves, or even the things that are being perpetuated by people in power right now. So it's overwhelming, but the idea that if there's one group, two group, this group, that group, that some people are trying to push the culture, even if it feels overwhelming.
Yeah, or like against the grain, yeah. Well, that's really interesting, because I know that we need to close, but one thing I'm really curious about is, over time now it's been about 10 years you all have been working together. What's changed in how you do the work or how you think about it, and where do you see this work headed?
What has changed? I think the most changes happened with us, to tell the truth. And some of the people that we've encountered that really appreciated what we had to offer. But I think right now I feel like this is the time, because I can't talk to anybody about strategies on ways to reduce their alcoholic tendencies unless they tell me they're alcoholic. And I feel like our whole culture and everything is that we have all these things that we haven't ever really talked about, and this is finally coming up. And where you can talk is where you can move. But when you ignore it and like it's not there, so that's why I'm really encouraged by the current things such as, Me Too, Time's Up, all the things that, talking about, Black Lives Matter. We live in a place where people mad because people say Black Lives Matter. And, so I'm like, hey, you know what? Let's talk about it though. So, even the concept of, in this political nature, even talking about reparations now, like, there's all these different things that come up that the culture now is giving wind to, giving life to. And as long as we can, make sure that spark doesn't, go out, but then set it ablaze, then you can't be part of the solutions if you're not even being part of the discussion about things. So that's where I'm encouraged, is that, it's 2019. And things that I felt like I was talking about in the 1990s are now actually becoming part of our cultural fabric. So I feel like, even though it's not where, my whole thing is I got to get away from where I think we should be in understanding where we are, and then understand and move the work from where we are. Because there's some things even as this stuff doing things like that we've done or did and be like, man, this feels so elementary. And then that's where I don't want to say we can call it intellectualism, we can call it, for me, it's just my life experience, or I don't want no type of elitism, but at the same time, it's like, hey, just the motto of a social worker is you work with people where they are, not where you want them to be. And I think that's probably what we've learned as a group a lot too, is that we have so much synergy and energy by moving the dial that maybe right now it's moving us to be able to think a little bit more about understanding that this is where our society is, and we have to understand that and not be discouraged, but keep pushing. So.
Right. It's interesting because I hear you, like when you're talking about some of these challenging things, right? Such as, well, sometimes it feels like you're starting from the beginning, from step one with everybody, or you're really sometimes feel like you're pushing against the grain, or you don't have the resources and stability and structure that could really help you, evaluate and spread out this work. I hear some of those challenges, and then the flip side, which is like the opportunities, right? I'm curious if there are other things, like as you reflect on it, like if you're trying to explain to folks about Peace Pros, what's like one takeaway you would want everyone to know about it or feel about it?
Well, that's a good question. I'll probably illustrate it through my little elevator speech I created a long time ago. So bear with me. I feel like, so my little elevator speech is, there's a time in our country where people was able to smoke on planes. Imagine getting on a plane right now where everybody in the plane smoking, right? There's where commercials talk about it wasn't any lung cancer. There's a notion that cigarettes didn't harm you. And in some ways, Peace Pros look at masculinity and the intersectionality all the same. There's a time where all that stuff was normal, and now we know it's different. And I feel like now we should know the difference collectively, that the way we bring up, treat, and our expectation of men is not healthy, the same way cigarettes were. And try to build synergy around that and understanding ways to rethink masculinity that not just benefits our personal, familial relationships, but also changes. It can ultimately change the whole, our whole nation, our whole community, in the way we dialogue and work with people and dealing with ways of deterring violence. So that's kind of like my little elevator speech on what Peace Pros would like to do, and in all ways, and in the sexuality ways, racism, gender, sexuality, things of that nature.
Yeah, I love it, and I think about prevention work is that big vision, right? It's that big picture thinking. And I really appreciate that Peace Pros, for a relatively small program, I have to say the longevity and just the complexity that you all have woven into your approach to violence prevention, just kind of, it's really amazing. And I'm really, I think it's really moving and really powerful to hear about it. So I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me and with the listeners of PreventConnect. There's so much more. There's so much more that we could probably talk about this for 3 more hours, but unfortunately, well, if people do want to learn more, there, as part of this conversation, we've posted some other resources like a fact sheet and a transcript of this, and other places people can look to find out more, or even to be in touch if they're really intrigued by this and want to hear more about what you all are doing, and either support the work or maybe do something like that in their own communities. So I appreciate very much that you took time for this conversation, and thank you all to the PreventConnect listeners as well for your attention. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.